One of the questions we get a lot as a social media agency is what should our internal team structure be? Meaning, on the brand side, how should we structure our own social media management team? And we've seen a lot of different configurations. We'll go through some of those today. But let's start off with a few things. Taylor, as you think about team structure, what sort of factors come into play?
Yeah, I think one of the first things that come into play that come to mind is that no company feels that they have enough resources for what social media requires. So from a large team to a small team, oftentimes we are hearing about how they feel like they don't have the resources to keep up with the speed of social or the changes that are happening in social. And even connected to that is that the sizes of these companies don't necessarily always correlate to the size of the team. We've worked with smaller brands that may not be a household name yet, but have large teams, and we work with large retailers that you think would have an extremely large team that don't necessarily, they have fewer internal resources. It's not always the case, but it does happen a lot more than you'd think. And so I think there's always that balance of understanding what kind of team you need to
Yeah.
run your company's social.
Yeah. The other factors that I see come into this is, does the internal leadership buy into it? How much do they think social matters? For some brands, literally 100% of their marketing is social media. For others, it's a small fraction. That gets to the size of the team. What's the customer demand? We work with some very large retail brands. They're getting hit on social constantly, and somebody's got to deal with that. And the last one is sort of the complexity of what you're selling. I mean, sometimes B2B brands have really complicated products that need to be sort of explained by sales engineers who almost come over to the social team. So sometimes B2B brands have bigger social teams than even B2C brands. But let's get into it, Lisa. Let's talk about really the structures we might see. Let me share a couple images for our friends here. All right, so now we see
Yeah,
what we
so
commonly
in
call the
this
one man
structure is
show.
actually more common than one would think. Sometimes I'll get a call in business development or even just talking with our clients, and you find someone who is overseeing social media. They usually have a title that's either social media manager. Sometimes they're also the digital manager or the marketing manager of the brand. So they're wearing multiple hats, usually in general, but then even on the social media side, they're wearing multiple hats. They usually feel like they need a lot of things, and they're trying to be supported internally by the internal marketing teams, but often those internal marketing teams are also very strapped. So when you think about, a design team that might be in-house, a lot of things that we hear in this model are that they don't have enough time for social media content creation. They are able to do it on the other side, but they don't have enough time for social media content creation. And so what it means is this person becomes as versatile as they can, but as you can imagine, social is always changing, and it pulls them so far into the weeds as well that they usually need some kind of strategic support because they're so far executing that they can't even kind of rise above and think about why they're doing social media in the first place. I'd like to say that this is not the most common structure, but I would say
Yeah.
I would like to bet that for a good many of companies still, even though we're 16 years as an agency later, we still see this, and it's very common. And like Taylor said, even larger brands, you'd be surprised that this person might be focused more on social, so they might have that social media title now, but they still are relying on customer care to do all of the, a lot of the community engagement, and they wish that they could do more video content production, but they're kind of strapped with the assets that they have. So this is very common. So if you are a one-man show, you're not alone, or a one-woman show, you're not alone. And that leads us to kind of the second structure that we see, which is becoming a little bit more common as the social media managers internally are kind of saying, hey, I've had enough. A lot of them are making kind of the case that they need more resources to support them. And I failed to mention this, but in the earlier model, sometimes we also see some different agency support structures that are also supporting them. So you might have internal brand teams, but you also might have a creative agency or a social media agency or a media buying agency that is supporting them with some of those functions. As we move to mid-scale teams, this is where we see 2 to 3 internal resources, and we still see that social media manager, but we see that either they're supported by full or part-time resources in two additional areas. The most common ones that we see them supported by is a dedicated community manager. This is key for clients that have a lot of inbound customer comments and customer care, and they really need someone to be on the channels more full time. It also can be a role that's helpful if a social media manager wants to play a more strategic role and they don't want to be the ones always publishing content or optimizing all these different assets for all these different channels, because now even if you have a great content producer, you still might need to syndicate one piece of content across 4 very different channels, and that takes time. So this community manager can offload some of that from the social media manager, and then typically we see content production is still, even in this model, often not full time for social. It's usually a shared resource internally. So again, it might be someone who has half of their time to social media content, but often still not full time, even in this model. And that's just because creative resources are always in demand. And the demands of social are increasing in terms of video content. So even if they've got a great content producer, now we're hearing that they can't create short form TikToks or Reels. And that is a challenge that they're trying to overcome in their content production. So, this, even with a mid-scale team, we work with a lot of mid-scale teams, and you might say, well, don't they have everything covered? And often they don't. They still need help with paid media, reporting, often even content production. And then the full scale team, as we move into that, often we see the main differences in the two are the community managers. There might be multiple community managers if there needs to be a community manager that's only focused on reactive engagement. So typically you'll see this for large brands that get a lot of inbound reactive volume, needing multiple community managers for that. Or maybe even a company that has multiple divisions that they need to support with social. They might have multiple community managers working with those divisions, getting assets, and being that internal resource. In this model, there may be a full-time content producer for social, even though I will say that's still fairly rare from what we see. And at times, we have seen an influencer manager be part of this team. Often that influencer manager may be split with PR still. So again, not always a full-time resource, but still a resource that's managing influencer relationships. And then again, these people might be supported by additional team members that may come from either an agency or in-house. So if there is like a broader marketing analytics team, they might be supported with that. But often we see analytics is just not supported across the board very well. When we talk about roles internally, we tend to see a lack of understanding how did everything that we just produce work, and that usually is because that the social media manager and all these team members are highly specialized in managing communities or producing content, and it's just hard to find someone that can take all of the social data and kind of analyze it. So we typically don't see those roles, but here's just a snapshot of the 3 most common that I just went through. In case you're curious, like I said, I think the most common ones we see are the one-man show or the mid-scale team, although we do work with several brands that are just larger brands that might have the full-scale team model and still even need an agency. So you still see just a lot of different hybrid approaches of all of this in terms of agency support and how agency support might be tacked on to any of those structures.
One thing that I really find interesting about that, Lisa, is that social media manager being carried throughout each of the models, because especially when you think about it from working with other teams, agencies, other partners, that having that major point of contact that's got their ear to the ground about this particular brand, what's happening on their socials, is a key part of the process, and kind of making sure that that person is interacting with the other different
Yeah, I
partners
think that's
and
a
vendors
really
to make sure
important
that
point that you
that
make, is
messaging
that
is
when people
consistent.
are like, where should we
Yeah.
start? What kind of resources do we need? And I would say, from hands down, having a strong social media manager internally is key. But not expecting them to do every single piece of execution, and making sure that they are senior level enough that they can understand and guide directionally and strategically the execution. Because when you have someone who's so junior and you're putting them in that role, and they have multiple divisions saying, post this on social media, or why are you not posting on social media, it's easy to kind of do a lot of activities and wear yourself out, and be over.
Right. Yeah, it's funny. It's funny because a brand would never let an intern do their trade show exhibit or the print ad they're running in the trade magazine, or any of that stuff. But if social's being done well, it's delivering even more eyeballs than those things. And some brands just don't seem to get that yet. But and as Lisa said, for all three of those models, there's roles for agencies to play. We typically get leaned on for content creation, paid media, reporting, influencer, and general strategy, because it's really hard to be tactical and you've only worked on one brand for the last 3 years and really know what 10 other brands are doing. So I hope that was helpful to you. Lisa, great job running them through these one man teams, knowing what to ask for when they get to move to two or even three, and the twos and threes going to know what to ask for when they get to go a little bit more headcount. So thanks so much.